I'm going to start by saying something that is a bit controversial. I rarely enjoy romance books. It's not just that the plots can feel boring and repetitive, it's that the male main characters are often written with the same cringy and a lot of the times problematic cliches. It used to be fine because I could always turn to fantasy or romantasy for well-written romantic leads, but now things are changing and they're changing for the worse. Even in my favorite genre, which is romantasy, I'm noticing some similar tired tropes creeping into the writing, and honestly, it's ruining the male main characters. So today, as both a reader and an aspiring author, I want to go over 5 cliches that are ruining male main characters in romance, in fantasy, and in romantasy, and talk about how writers could actually make them feel fresh again. So with that being said, let's get into it. Welcome back to the channel and to the podcast where I ramble about stories in books, music, and movies. If you're interested in discussing these things, then make sure to subscribe so you don't miss future deep dives. The first cliche I am honestly so done with, especially in romantasy, is the powerful, brooding male main character. You know, he's the king, the prince, or the leader of some movement with extraordinary powers, big muscles, maybe some mysterious tattoos. Basically, he doesn't really do much except glare, scare people, and smirk at the female lead and secretly have a soft spot for her. That's the character I'm talking about, and I'm pretty sure you know very well if you also read romantasy like me. At first, this trope was kind of fun, especially in an enemies to lovers setting, where you get to watch this intimidating, grumpy guy slowly soften because of the female main character. But now, so many of these characters are just empty. They're overly sexualized, lack personality, and don't have any real flaws or character arcs. They're leaders, lovers, and perfect humans all rolled into one. This doesn't feel realistic anymore. What I think would work better now is male characters who are a little flawed, a little awkward. What's wrong with a male lead who doesn't have the most extraordinary power in the kingdom, but have some type of power that is interesting and compelling, and who can make mistakes and also mess up and not be the strongest all the time? I feel like these types of characters feel more relatable and endearing. Watching them face challenges, grow, and overcome their own obstacles makes their romantic journey so much more meaningful. And honestly, when they're less untouchable and more human, we as readers actually care about them. And their story hits harder, and we root for them, and we want the best for them. The second cliche I have to talk about is the way attraction is often treated as if it's love. In many romance books, especially in chapters written from the male main character's POV, he spends most of the time talking about how hot the female main character is and all the sexual fantasies he has about her. And mind you, these aren't unknown books. They're popular, beloved, and widely celebrated. And while reading a lot of them, I kept thinking, is this the romance I'm supposed to be swooning over? I picked up these books expecting a Mr. Darcy level of love and appreciation, and I got this instead. It feels like male characters today are written in a way where it feels like they confuse physical attraction with love, as if the two are the same. Yes, they do exist together in romance, which is so normal in a lot of relationships and romantic settings, but they are not the same. Where are the acts of service, the subtle observations of the heroine, the noticing what she likes and dislikes, tuning into how she's feeling, taking care of her without expecting anything in return? Where is the yearning, the quiet longing for her presence, the restraint that comes from not daring to touch her out of fear of making her uncomfortable and possibly ruining things with her? These are the things that are missing in so many male main characters in many modern romances today. And they're exactly what makes a love story feel deep and so memorable. Also, they're exactly what makes the male main characters, again, feel realistic and genuine and not some extremely sexual guy who objectifies the woman he's supposed to love. The third cliche is one that makes me so upset to admit, but here it is. It's the so-called enemies to lovers that aren't really enemies to lovers at all. They're more like hate-driven attraction to lovers or lusty hate to lovers. I've always been a fan of this trope, and it's one of my favorites, honestly. In the past, almost every book I read with it was 5-star read for me, or at least I rated it very, very high. But now I'm tired of it. And guess what part of the problem is? If you said the male main character, then you guessed right. It's often the same recycled character, which, as I mentioned, is like a leader of some sort. He's tattooed, he has a lot of muscles, he's overly sexy. I've already talked about it, but I'm so over it. Even worse, a lot of books labeled enemies to lovers aren't really enemies to lovers at all, as I said. They are just two people who are heavily attracted to each other, and they decide to put their hate aside almost immediately. This hate that's supposed to be deep, intense hate that one can really needs to work a lot of themselves to get over. A lot of this like dynamic makes me so uncomfortable because this is not love, this is attraction, people. One of the reasons this trope used to be so fun was the payoff. The slow burn, the push and pull, and finally witnessing the characters confess their love for each other and get their happy ending. Now, they become a couple too quickly and move through the romance before the tension even truly develops. I would challenge the entire romantasy genre to ask, what's wrong with exploring other tropes besides enemies to lovers? I used to feel like no other trope could top it in terms of romance and dynamics, but now I'm finding tropes like reluctant allies to lovers or other slow burn setups much more endearing and interesting. They allow the love story to develop beautifully, showing growth, yearning, and connection in a way that feels earned. Not to mention how these other tropes allow for the male main characters to be written in a better way, giving them actual arcs, backgrounds, and flaws, and depth, not just smirks, sexual vibes, and a few lines and calling it a day. So why not explore other kinds of tropes? There are plenty that make a love story just as amazing, and that's coming from someone who was a skeptic about any other trope other than enemies to lovers. I'll say that, especially in romantasy. There are those other tropes that can make the love story just as amazing without recycling the same predictable patterns over and over. Fourth cliche I want to talk about is the morally gray male main character. For anyone who doesn't know, morally gray means a character with a questionable moral compass, someone who does horrendous things at times, but also has redeeming moments of kindness. Think Damon or Klaus from The Vampire Diaries. They weren't fully good, but they weren't fully evil either. At first, this, just like a lot of the other tropes that I mentioned, this trope was genuinely exciting. It made male main characters feel intriguing and complex. Their choices between good and bad carried weight. Their mistakes haunted them, and that struggle added depth to their arcs. But now it's, again, getting so overdone. And to make it worse, most of these so-called morally gray characters aren't actually morally gray. The female main character thinks they are, or the story tells us they are, but in reality they're just sweethearts who never truly do anything bad. It feels like a trick to make them more lovable, without giving them real complexity. And here I come to another question that is kind of similar to the one I asked for the previous cliche that I talked about, and that is, what's wrong with the male main character just being a good guy? Why does he have to be brooding or morally questionable to be considered compelling? Characters like Stefan or Enzo and the later episodes of The Vampire Diaries were still layered, still interesting, and at least in my opinion, just as attractive. They prove you don't need the morally gray label for a male lead to feel deep and worth rooting for. The fifth and the last cliche that I want to talk about for this video is possessiveness. For some reason, so many male main characters are written as if being territorial or controlling is the ultimate proof of their love. And this include all those who did this to you moments and the constant growling, like, what's the point? And at this point, I feel like we completely lost the plot, you guys. Why is he growling all the time? Like, since when does being aggressive, jealous, or impulsive automatically equal romance? Personally, I find it way more attractive when a character actually respects the female lead's independence. When he feels jealous, but he knows he can't control her, and more importantly, shouldn't try to control her out of respect. That's when it becomes interesting and endearing. If instead of lashing out, he chooses to communicate his jealousy with her, that's where the real intimacy happens. That's where trust builds. Him being vulnerable about his feelings and her reassuring him, that's more cuter and more powerful than endless tantrums disguised as passion. Instead of doing all of this, I'd love for male characters to be written as emotionally intelligent, regulating their own jealousy and growing into better people because of their love and the love story that they're sharing with the female lead. Heated argument here and there can be fun, especially when it's not toxic. It happens a lot of times during the story because the two main characters, for example, are both equally stubborn. But that should be part of the love story and not the entire love story. Again, if he's always doing those tantrums and disguising them as proof of passion and love for the female main character, I feel like this is just immature. He's not worthy of swooning over. He's no Mr. Darcy, so I'll definitely say that. So there you have it. Those are the tropes that I feel are ruining male main characters and romance for me, especially in romantasy lately. The thing is, I know how good romantasy can be. I read some amazing love stories in this genre, so I still expect the best from it. And that's why, as an aspiring author myself, I really believe that when those cliches stop getting overused. We'll get male characters and romances that feel fresh, layered, and unforgettable again. Of course, these are just my opinions, so I really want to know yours. What tropes do you think are making male main characters less compelling these days? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this deep dive, then make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss future videos. And you can also check out the podcast version of Once Upon a Ramble on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. If you want to connect more, then make sure to follow me on my Instagram and on my TikTok, linked in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and I appreciate it so much. Yeah, we'll meet again next week. Mwah. Bye.